Do you remember the Change My Mind meme? The meme with a guy sitting at a table that has a sign and a statement on it with a challenge to change his mind? Well, that guy is named Steven Crowder. He's a political commentator and comedian. He also has his own talk show called Louder with Crowder. He also uploaded a video to YouTube a couple of years ago, which claims that the HIV/AIDS epidemic was a hoax. And he's dead serious. And dead wrong.
Once upon a time, in the 80s, the media and governments of the world warned of an impending catastrophe. One that could end civilization as we know it. The epidemic of HIV/AIDS.
Well, yeah, that's because HIV/AIDS was and still is a very serious disease. At the time, it seemed to have come out of nowhere and was killing people really fast before anyone actually knew what it was. So, yeah, it was a very scary time. But make no mistake, even back then there were people just like Steven who didn't believe that it was real.
Yes, in the 1980s and early 90s the message was clear. No one was safe from the silent non-killer that is AIDS.
Yeah, he actually did just call AIDS a silent non-killer.
AIDS, oh no! Many people had the wool pulled over their eyes with this hoax, but with the media aflutter over the latest doomsday scenario, activists were quick to vilify skeptics and reasonable doubters.
Oh yes, the true victims, the reasonable doubters and the skeptics of a deadly virus. I guess today the equivalent to those people would be people who believe that coronavirus was caused by 5G.
In a hyperly politicized climate, lobbyists dug in their heels, setting the stage for the silent non-killer AIDS to become the single most researched funded disease in the modern history of America.
Very sneaky there, Stephen, but that's not what that graph actually shows. What the graph shows is research dollars spent on a disease per person who has that disease. In other words, what that graph shows is that for every one person who has cancer, that equals $500 of research funding. But for every one person who has HIV, that equals about $3,000 of research funding. However, more money overall is spent on cancer research than HIV.
Despite it being a statistical non-risk factor, we demand more money to combat this horrible disease which, contrary to popular belief, afflicts people of all shapes, sizes, and sexual orientations. Only that wasn't true at all. Statistically, the CDC puts a heterosexual American's chance of contracting AIDS at 0%. With 92% of all cases stemming directly from male-to-male sexual contact, and the majority of the remainder coming from intravenous drug use.
This guy has millions of followers who believe him even when he says stuff this incredibly wrong. And it's so wrong in so many ways. But let's start with the simple fact that the risk of a straight man picking up HIV from sex is not zero. I can't believe I had to say that in 2020. So obviously the CDC does acknowledge the fact that a heterosexual man having sex with an infected woman is at risk of contracting HIV. I guess Steven was just too lazy to look this up because it's directly on the CDC's website. In fact, if we include women and use CDC numbers reported from recent years, then we can determine that roughly 1 in 4 new cases of HIV diagnosed every year in the US occurs due to heterosexual contact. Last I checked, that's not zero. But wait, there's more. Those numbers are only reported for the US. And thanks to good biomedical research and a good health infrastructure, we don't have as big of a problem with HIV/AIDS in America as some other countries do. But globally, it is estimated that about 70% of HIV cases occur due to heterosexual contact. Far, far from the absolute lie that Steven Crowder is telling you.
But clawing at the hundreds of millions of dollars in government grants, fear-mongering ran rampant, with statistics deliberately being misreported. In fact, one of the most cited landmark studies, which reported over 573,000 AIDS cases among no-risk victims, the conductors were later caught fudging their data, having to reverse over 46% of the non-risk factor victims to be reclassified. But by that point, the damage had been done.
Stephen, if you're gonna say that there's a 0% risk for heterosexuals to get HIV, don't show us an abstract that says the exact opposite thing. Yes, this paper is saying that in this sample size, there were some men who actually had other risks for HIV other than being heterosexual, but not all of them. It's not zero.
But hindsight is 2020. In the moment, everyone believed this silent, non-killer AIDS to truly be an epidemic, even though the chances of contracting it short of anal sex with gay strangers while shooting heroin was statistically non-existent.
Stephen, I just told you, if you're going to tell us that the risk is 0%, don't then show us a chart that says that the risk is not 0%. But I have to say that this is the part of the video where I just think that he's not just stupid. He's actively lying to his audience and deceiving them. So he shows this one chart from this CDC source showing HIV diagnoses among young adult males and the transmission modes that made it happen. Now, this is a very specific chart in a source that has a lot of information in it. He must have seen this other information if he pulled this one chart from it. I wonder why he didn't show you this chart. It shows us that in 2011, out of all the newly diagnosed HIV cases among young adults and adolescents, 27% could be attributed to heterosexual contact. Or why didn't he show you this chart, which shows us that HIV cases due to heterosexual contact have actually been increasing? The only reasons I can think of are that he was either too lazy to do good research on this topic, too stupid to understand any of it, or he's flat out lying and he knows exactly what he's saying. I really hope it's not that last one.
Matter of fact, the chances of a straight person contracting HIV in the modern world is 4 in 10,000 per exposure.
So once again, let's just make this clear that it's not 0%, and you're admitting that again. Now, this 4 in 10,000 number is accurate for men, sort of. It definitely increases depending on the stage of HIV infection that you're exposed to. But for women, the risk is actually twice as much. I wonder why he keeps leaving women out of this. I swear, you couldn't write better irony, could you? But in all seriousness, he's trying to downplay this number, which doesn't make any sense because if you just imagine how many exposures take place around the world on a daily basis, it's not hard to think how this virus could spread around the world, which it did.
Among all the pandemonium, none of this mattered. Math, statistical realities were all tossed aside for fear of being called a bigot.
Well, now, almost 40 years later, you are the one ignoring all the math and all the science. For what reason?
Well through the 1990s, funding continued to soar for the entirely preventable disease while countless Americans, including millions of children, died of diseases helplessly, entirely out of their control with actual mortality rates. But they didn't have a celebrity awareness campaign and received a fraction of the funding.
He's talking about cancer here. And he's wrong. Like, are you surprised at this point? Cancer has been consistently, overall, more funded than HIV/AIDS projects. It did not get a fraction of the funding. Now, I'm really glad that you mentioned actual mortality rates, Stephen, because that gives us a chance to talk about the real ones, the ones that you don't think exist. For example, total deaths in the United States due to HIV/AIDS amounts to about 675,000 people. Worldwide, those numbers grow to over 1 million every single year. If those aren't actual mortality rates to you, I don't know what is. HIV/AIDS used to be an absolute death sentence to anybody who was diagnosed with it. But thanks to the research dollars and efforts from scientists studying it, it is now a manageable and treatable disease. Not only that, but researching HIV has led to breakthroughs in other areas as well, including microbiology, immunology, and molecular biology. In fact, 2 drugs that are commonly used to treat HIV have potential to be useful in fighting the current coronavirus pandemic. So, those research dollars were never wasted. Well, that's going to do it for this video today. I do hope that Steven Crowder one day sees this and hopefully corrects himself and lets his audience know that he was very horribly wrong when it comes to HIV/AIDS. I've been Dr. Wilson, this was Debunk the Funk, and I'll see you guys next time.